Okay, time for us to begin. Today's topic is going to be wisdom regarding speech. And unlike previous sessions, I need to start with two scriptures from the New Testament, because speech is so important to us as Christians. It's how we communicate with the world, and we don't want to communicate in such a way that they doubt whether we are Christians. The world's speech today is becoming more and more coarse, and a lot of it is abusive, and a lot of it projects hate in various forms. And so we need to be very careful of our speech, especially since there's always somebody with a smartphone pointed at us, recording what we say so it can be used against us, or it can be used to become something amusing to the world, something that the world would say, so he thinks he's a Christian and he talks like that. And there are so many words that you dare not use in our current culture. You might come from elsewhere, as I have, and language that we used commonly, without any prejudice at all, is now regarded as the highest prejudice that can possibly be uttered. And so a lot of things that were just normal for us are now highly, highly dangerous. And people have lost their chances of being elected. People have been punished in various ways for what they said that was caught on someone's camera, someone's phone, and published. So be careful of what you say. What you say represents what Christians should be saying, or that's what we're supposed to think. So I'd like you to turn to Ephesians 4. We're going to read just a verse from Ephesians 4, the end of the chapter, and another verse from chapter 5. And the first verse is Ephesians 4 and verse 29. And listen to what Paul is telling these Ephesians. The Ephesians, the church was established in what was a center of worship for Diana. And so there was religious tension between the worshippers of Diana, and you know that the silversmiths had Paul thrown in prison because of what he said. So he warns them, let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth. That's an absolute ban. You have to be so careful that what you say in Ephesus is not counted as unwholesome, but only such a word as is good for edification according to the need of the moment. So not only are you to prevent unwholesome words, but you must only speak what is edifying, what builds up. And unfortunately, we live in a world of critics. I am one, and probably there are many here who are critics. We criticize, and I do. It's just a fault of mine, and I have to really work hard to control it. You know, you think of television. There's always something to criticize on television. You think of what's spread via the internet, lot to criticize there. So you have to be careful that that doesn't carry over into your speech about the church, your fellow Christians, the preacher, the elders, or whatever. I've heard all of them criticized. And even Paul, the apostle, says that The Corinthians thought that his speech was contemptible and his appearance was weak. So Paul knew the dangers of criticism and how it could destroy the influence of the one who's preaching. And he concludes the statement with saying, so that it will give grace to those who hear. So just think of what you're saying. Will it give grace to those who hear? Will it be a word of encouragement? Or will it be a word that builds them up in their faith, edifies them? Turn over to chapter 5, and we look at verse 4. Well, actually, let's start at verse 3 and 4. Immorality or any impurity or greed must not even be named among you, as is proper among saints. And there must be no filthiness and silly talk or coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. And there's a lot of that in what we hear around us today. And Christians should stand apart from that and should recognize that they are being evaluated all the time, and have people evaluate you as a Christian and maybe be ashamed of what they've been saying around you or in your hearing. So these are concerns of Christians, and of course there's a lot else in the New Testament about speech. James 3 tells us how difficult it is to control your speech. But we're going to look at what Proverbs has to say. This is ancient wisdom, came from God to Solomon at his request. And he was praised for having made the request that he be given wisdom. And so in Proverbs, beginning in chapter 4, Proverbs 4, and verse 24, the ways in which speech can be destructive instead of building up. You can really destroy people by what you say about them and maybe say around them. So Proverbs 4 and verse 24, can we have someone to read? Some brave soul who will read?
Put away from you a deceitful.
Yes.
Okay. 24. Put away from you a deceitful mouth and put devious speech far from you.
All right. What do we call deceitful speech today? You're being deceitful, you're what? Lying. So lying is one of the things that we have to eliminate from our lives. Just speak the truth and live by that. So one of the principles is that we need to put that away because it's a destructive use of speech. Now turn to chapter 12. Chapter 12 and verse 22. Yes, 12 and 22. Okay, so that's how the Lord looks at, and when it's talking about the Lord there, it's talking about the Lord God. How does he look on lying speech? It's an abomination. So you're really in bad with the Lord if you are lying. But he delights in those who deal faithfully. In other words, speak the truth. He's delighted in what you're doing. And sometimes the truth is difficult to say. We're afraid that it might offend, and so we tend to want to soften it or eliminate it in order to please our friends. Then Proverbs 6, interesting proverb. It's one of what they call the Numerical Proverbs. And the reason for that is probably just because it makes it more memorable. So I'll read that. Proverbs 6, verses 17 to 19. I'm going to start at 16. There are 6 things which the Lord hates, yes, 7 which are an abomination to him. This is usually the formula they start with, 5 things and 6. Here it's 6 things and 7. Haughty eyes, a lying tongue. So it's right there at the top of the list. Hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that run rapidly to evil, a false witness who utters lies, and one who spreads strife among brothers. These are things which God hates. And so that's pretty strong language. It means that we need to be a lot more careful about what we say and how we say it than we may have been in the past. This kind of false witness, verse 19, and one who spreads strife among brothers, can really be destructive in the work of a church. You hear something and you begin to follow the track. Where did he get it from? Where did he get it from? And so on. And you find that there's somebody who's going around the congregation spreading lies about some member or spreading gossip about some member. And so people begin to take sides and the congregation can be divided. And such people need to be stopped. But the responsibility for stopping this begins with the person who hears a bit of gossip, and doesn't spread it. Often we hear something that a person has said, and we don't know the context. We just heard him say this. We don't know who he was talking to or what the topic was, but all of a sudden, here this guy's making some kind of accusation. And that immediately begins to stir up trouble in the congregation.
Mel, that's a great point, because a lot of times people seek out those who will be receptive to the gospel.
Yes.
Because it's like, if I want told, I'll tell him.
Yeah.
And you share it with somebody else.
Yeah. And especially if he says, now I heard this, but don't spread it any further. Yeah. It almost guarantees that it will begin to grow and spread. And often the story gathers more and more facets or aspects to it as it goes on. And, you don't know how bad it's going to be in the end, and you can't imagine. But I never said that. No, but you started it off, and it's like a stone rolling downhill. It gathers rubbish as it goes. All right. An interesting statement about gossip or lying is found in Proverbs 20. Proverbs 20 and verse 17. (20 and 17).
Food gained by fraud tastes sweet, but one ends up with a mouthful of wrath.
Yes. In other words, if you gain something by lying, eventually it's going to bite you back, and you're going to regret that you gained it that way. And he's got a very a very picturesque way of describing that. And so be careful. Another aspect of the tongue, which we probably all have experienced at some time or other, is found in Proverbs 26 and verse 28.
A lying tongue makes those it crushes, and a flattering mouth works ruin.
Okay. So, two ways in which the tongue, especially flattery, actually brings people to ruin, because they begin to accept that your flattery is a kind of exaggerated praise, giving him credit for a lot more than he's actually capable of. And eventually it's going to bring ruin. And then Proverbs 29 and verse 5. You've probably had flattery used on you. It's one of the great manipulative moves. You know, you're so good at this. I know that you're really willing to take on this job. And usually you're not all that willing, but, you know, it's nice to hear good things about you, but you know it's going to cost you a lot of work. And so it's not very good. So what does Proverbs 29:5 say? Yeah. So you flatter your neighbor, you're actually going to be tripped up by that, because they will regard you probably as insincere. More about gossip and slander, Proverbs 11. There's a lot about speech in the Proverbs. So obviously, it's one of the big problems. When you open your mouth, what you're going to say can have far greater consequences than you imagine. And so you need to watch what you're saying and how you say it. The problem is we get careless, and we're very often listening in order to be able to jump in and say something. So we're not really hearing what the man is saying. We're waiting till he stops speaking so that we can jump in. And so we haven't really considered everything that he says. But Proverbs 11:13, we mentioned this a little earlier, but he who goes about as a talebearer reveals secrets, but he who is trustworthy conceals the matter. And so when somebody says something to you, just accept it and say nothing more. Don't pass it on. He may have, in an unguarded moment, said something that he wanted your help with, but you have instead used that as a weapon against him. And sometimes we're unaware of it, and we open our mouth, and out comes something that our mind seems to have nothing to do with. It just came out. There are many times, not with regard to flattery or anything like that, many times I've opened my mouth and said something, and then I've thought, what a stupid thing to say. They must think I'm an idiot to say that. I remember when somebody saw me in an office talking to my friend, he thought he might recognize me, and he asked me if I was Harold Sheasby's son, which I am, Harold Sheasby was my father. And so I was thinking of how to frame my answer instead of just saying yes. I thought, well, shall I say yes, I'm his son, or yes, he's my father? So I had the choice between the two, and I got them mixed up, and I said, yes, I'm my father's son. And I thought, what a stupid statement. Most of us are our father's son, right? All of us are our father's son. So it was a complete nonsensical answer, and I kind of blushed because I had tripped up. And that happens to all of us at times, I guess. Sometimes you can pass it off as something stupid you said, but sometimes what comes out is something that you should have concealed and not repeated. So you have to be very careful when you open your mouth. Proverbs 16. And on this topic, there are many more verses than the ones I'm quoting here. I've picked out the best ones. A lot are repetitive. Some are identical in one place to what they are in another for some reason. Probably the person who was collecting them didn't check his work all that thoroughly. But Proverbs 16, 27 and 28. All right, so this is what happens. What you say so often creates strife. And you can break up friendships. You can even influence marriages in untoward ways that you would never think of, never intend. And what may have been some innocent scene that you saw, when you repeat it, the way you repeat it very often, to make it juicier in the hearer's ears, is going to destroy the person and maybe destroy the marriage. Some things just are that bad. And what you say cannot be unsaid. You can try and fix it up, you can try and retract it. The more you do so, the more suspicion begins to surround what you've said. So you have to be ultra careful. Proverbs 11:9, another bad thing about speech. There are good things about speech, by the way. Don't be afraid to speak. 11 and 9. Okay. So you can destroy your neighbor, but you can also deliver your neighbor. And maybe that is when you correct what has been going around and saying, no, it wasn't that way at all. This is what happened. So with your truth, you're rescuing your neighbor, you're delivering your neighbor from what could be a bad situation. Proverbs 25, 9 and 10 on the same tack as we have just read. Proverbs 25, 9 and 10. Any bold reader?
Take your neighbor to court, do not betray another's confidence, for the one who hears it may shame you, and the charge against you will stand.
Okay. So, don't reveal the secret. Argue your case with your neighbor. Do not reveal the secret of another. So, if you're given a secret, it stays with you. One of the things that happens in the leadership very often is you hear about a problem and you discuss it maybe in the eldership and try to help people resolve the problem. And what's going to happen is that some people are going to try and get the information that the elders have so that they can start a gossip chain. And very often the elder's wife is a route to the elder, they think. And it really puts a lot of stress on elders' wives because they're constantly being pumped for information. And best thing is, never share anything. And then they don't have any problem. They just say, he doesn't tell me anything. Because it's so easy to start gossip, and it's so destructive.
I know this may not be part of one proverb, but I really like the illustration that is given in the New Testament in James, about James chapter 3, 6,
yes.
that says that the tongue is a fire.
Yes.
The very world of iniquity. The tongue is set among our members, and that which defiles our entire body. It sets on fire the course of our life, and it's set on fire by hell. For every species of beast and being, a bird, a reptile, and creature of the sea is tamed, and it's been tamed by the human race, but no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison.
Yeah. That's an extreme statement, but it is extremely hard to control the tongue. You hear something being said and you know that you can help it, correct it or whatever, or you could make it a lot worse. And the temptation is very strong. I would say the Lord can control the tongue if you ask him to help you. And we often need that guidance. Should I say anything or say nothing? And it's almost always better to say nothing, because whatever you say can be misconstrued. If the person has certain feelings about a situation, they'll take whatever you say and just twist it a little bit to favor their point of view. So you have to be very careful. You have to be careful not to say anything, or try not to say anything, but if you do say anything, you've got to be very careful which words you use. And now there are some words which are so loaded that if they even have a hint that you might have used that word, you're immediately judged as being unworthy. Yes?
I think that's one of the reasons we need to realize that we constantly need to pray to the Lord for wisdom.
Yes.
It's not something we automatically have. Our judgment as humans seems to really be off the mark.
Yeah.
So in wisdom, part of the wisdom is knowing what not to say as much as it is knowing what to say.
Yes. Knowing when to just keep silent. Because whatever you say can be fuel for the fire on one side or another. So, okay. The last on some of the negative things about speech, Proverbs 20 and verse 20. Proverbs 20 and verse 20. Okay. That's a frightful saying, isn't it? If you curse your father or mother, your lamp will go out in time of darkness. It's just one thing you should never do. And then Proverbs 30 and verse 10. on the same lines, but in a way that is kind of surprising to us, maybe.
Do not slander a servant to their master, but they will curse you, and you will pay for it.
Yeah. So we don't live in this time, but don't curse an employee to his boss. You're stepping on dangerous ground, and it's going to have repercussions that you cannot imagine. Yeah.
If I may share on that. I'm in sales, so my job is to pursue a business relationship with clients. And one of the things that I've always tried to do, and that our companies have stressed, is to not talk negatively about your competitor. So I have a counterpart at a couple of other companies that are also, pursuing clients just like I am. And, you could see if they have an account, that business client is kind of like their master when they're working for them, provide that. And so this is something that I've tried to apply within that relationship of not going in and negatively saying, well, that person's not good, or they don't tell you the truth, or anything like that, because in the end, it's not going to benefit me. You might pick up an account here or there, but you're going to get a relation, your credibility is going to be ruined within the industry. That you only talk negative about others, as opposed to going in and presenting yourself and what you can do for them.
Almost as if you're afraid of the competition and you put them down, and I think people feel less of you when you do that.
Yeah, you feel like you might be gaining, or boy, if I can just get them to feel this way, then they'll pick me. But in reality, if they're at all a decent person, they're not going to have a positive view of you.
Yeah. It doesn't do you any good at all. Now, a completely different aspect. Proverbs 15. See what you think of this. Proverbs 15 and verse 14.
The mind of the intelligent seeks knowledge, but the mouth of fools feeds on folly.
I think this summarizes pretty well a lot of what's happening online. There's a lot of clear, intelligible comment and speech, but there are people who go for wild theories because it's easier very often to follow a wild theory than to do the research and find out what's really happening and what's really necessary. And some people live by that. This guy's just been fined almost $1 billion for spreading lies. There was theories that he's made up which have no truth to them at all. And there are a lot of people who just feed on that kind of silliness. And it's costly, so it's not a wise thing to do. And it's so easy to get pulled into that without doing much thought at all. And that's what they're counting on, people who don't want to put in their intelligence to seek out the truth and just follow this theory and this lie. And it's one of the bad ways of thinking and talking. And then much the same, we back up to verse 2, which says, "The tongue of the wise makes knowledge acceptable, but the mouth of fools sprouts folly." And the fool is the person who's not doing any thinking about it. He just hears something and repeats it. He doesn't check to see whether it's true, Very often, wild theories begin when people take 2 words or 2 minutes out of a speech, maybe a speech that lasted 18, 20 minutes. They take 2 minutes worth of words out of that and concoct a theory on it, and they obviously haven't considered everything that is said and put that in context and understood it. And so it in fact causes a lot of harm to people when that kind of things happen, but it often happens these days. There's a lot of it going on, so we need to be careful when we listen to speech that we distinguish that which is based on knowledge rather than on folly. Yeah.
I don't remember the chapter, but it was the one before we went to chapter 11, and it kind of stood out the bottom of my screen in chapter verse 15, and it said, "Better to be patient than a warrior." And if you apply that to your tongue,
Yeah.
and just like you said, you hear something, and maybe you think it's time to jump in and stand up for Jesus and knock that other person down and tell them how they're wrong and all. Be patient and formulate a response that's edifying and is going to, bring grace to those that are going to hear it.
Yeah. A lot of people are only listening for a gap in your speech so that they can jump in with something. In other words, they're not really considering logically all that you've been saying. And so maybe you shouldn't speak so fast. I don't know. But we're going to look next time at the constructive use of speech. But chapter 14 and verse 7. And 7.
Go from the presence, you go from the presence of a foolish man, when you do not receive and counsel of knowledge.
Okay. If you have one of these guys who's sprouting out all of these theories that are in wide circulation, especially over the internet, the advice of the proverb writer is you need to leave them. You don't need to pay attention to them at all. Because if you do, if you fill your mind with the rubbish that they're talking, you won't ever find the truth of something. So you have to leave the foolish person and you have to investigate the thing for yourself instead of just continuing to listen. So there's a time to walk out of that kind of discussion. There's a time to say, I'm not going to pay any attention to this source. And there you can distinguish certain sources which are just constantly spewing out rubbish. It's something that confronts us almost daily. Yes. That was chapter 14 and verse 7. So next week we're going to take up the constructive use of speech, because that can really build people up. It can help them understand things better. And it's not only what you say, but how you say it, which really often puts them in the picture of what really is true and what is right. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you for your comments.